I learned my marriage was over while I was 31 weeks pregnant, lying in a high-risk maternity unit, and watching my husband appear on the local news. He was standing beside my parents and my younger sister on the boarding deck of a luxury cruise ship in Port Miami. 5 minutes later, I found a $3,750 charge on my personal credit card. When I called and asked where he was, he said, "Tampa, I just left a meeting." I did not accuse him. I asked the nurse to bring me my laptop. That morning had begun with a routine prenatal appointment. My blood pressure measured 158/94, then climbed again 20 minutes later. The obstetrician used the careful voice doctors use when they want you to listen without panicking. They suspected preeclampsia, but the baby's heart rate was strong. My blood work had not shown organ damage, and there was no immediate reason to deliver. I would stay for 72 hours of monitoring. If the tests remained stable, I could go home with a blood pressure cuff, reduced activity, and twice-weekly appointments. My father, Grant Bennett, called before lunch. He said the family had to attend a dealer conference in Tampa. The Hendersons, one of Bennett Coastal Marine Group's largest clients, were considering a major purchase. Mason handled the account. My mother, Elaine, and my sister, Lauren, were going because, according to Grant, relationships closed deals long before contracts did. "Don't worry about us," my mother said. "Your only job is to keep that baby comfortable." I remember feeling grateful. That is the detail I wish I could erase. Around noon, the television ran a cheerful segment about the maiden voyage of a new luxury liner leaving Port Miami. A reporter stood among champagne glasses and white uniforms, speaking about tourism, local business, and unforgettable experiences. Then my father stepped into the frame. Grant had never met a camera he did not consider an invitation. The reporter introduced him as a local marine entrepreneur. He raised a glass. My mother laughed beside him. Lauren waved toward the camera. And Mason stood behind them wearing the pale blue shirt I had ironed 2 nights before my appointment. For several seconds, my mind refused to organize what my eyes had already recorded. I opened my banking app. The charge had posted 6 days earlier. Cruise excursion package, $3,750. Cardholder activity, Mason Reed. Status, authorized user. I called him. He answered on the second ring. "Where are you?" There was a pause, small enough that most people would have missed it. "Tampa," he said. "I just left a meeting." Behind his voice came a distant, low sound. A ship's horn, long and unmistakable. I watched the television screen fade into a commercial. "Then finish your work," I said, and ended the call. Until that moment, I had believed marriage meant sharing risk honestly, not discovering that trust could be spent while I was too ill to object. My hands were steady when I contacted the bank. The representative explained that because Mason was an authorized user, the purchase could not be treated like a stranger stealing my card. I remained responsible for the balance unless the charge was resolved another way. So I downloaded the statement. I saved the transaction details. I removed Mason as an authorized user, requested a new card number, changed my passwords, and redirected my future paychecks into an account in my name alone. When Marisol returned, she carried my laptop under one arm. On the whiteboard beside my bed, beneath the baby's heart rate, she had written, "Reach 32 weeks, June 18th. June 18th was also the day the ship returned. Marisol followed my eyes to the date. "Boats come back," she said. I opened a new spreadsheet and named it Household Actuals. The $3,750 charge was not the first money Mason had taken from our marriage. My real job had nothing to do with my father. I was a senior accounting manager at Atlantic Gate Logistics, where nobody called me a secret weapon. They called me by my title, sent me reports before deadlines, and expected me to find what did not belong. I reviewed financial statements, tested internal controls, approved reconciliations, and followed discrepancies until they either made sense or became someone's problem. At Atlantic Gate, my name appeared beside my authority. At Bennett Coastal Marine Group, my name appeared beside the cleanup. Every January for 15 years, beginning when I was 19. I helped my father close the books. I reconciled bank accounts, sorted invoices, reviewed receivables, prepared work papers, and built tax files from the records his bookkeeper provided. The company paid me roughly $3,000 each year and issued a Form 1099. On paper, that made me a paid preparer. In reality, $3,000 covered a fraction of the hours. Whenever I suggested tracking my time, Grant smiled as though I had made an embarrassing joke. "Don't count hours with family," he would say. The first year, I believed him. I had found $1,100 in unnecessary bank fees caused by the way the marina processed deposits. My father drove me to the docks the next morning, placed a warm hand on my shoulder, and introduced me to 2 dealers and a lender. "This is my daughter," he said, "the only person I trust with the real numbers." I lived on that sentence for years. At 19, it sounded like love. At 24, it sounded like a promise. By 35, I should have recognized it as compensation. I was not blind to the imbalance. I simply kept believing the imbalance was temporary, that loyalty was an investment, and that one day the title, the equity, and my father's public pride would finally reconcile everything I had carried for free. The promise was always the same: Chief Financial Officer. First, I needed to graduate. Then, the company needed another showroom. Then, revenue needed to stabilize. Then, the charter division needed to grow. Later, Mason had to get the sales department under control so Grant could build the right leadership structure. Every condition produced another condition. Meanwhile, Bennett Coastal added boats, trucks, staff, client parties, and a second showroom with glass walls facing the water. There was always money for something people could photograph. There was never a CFO. Lauren became marketing director without targets. I could identify or hours anyone could verify. My mother, Elaine, managed parties, invitations, charity tables, and the quiet social arrangements that made clients feel they had joined a family instead of buying a boat. Mason sold vessels and charter packages with the confidence of a man who believed every closed deal proved something about his worth. Grant treated him like the son he had never had. Mason's salary, bonuses, company car, and future all ran through my father. He learned quickly that agreement was more profitable than independence. I was the only person at family dinners whose paycheck did not depend on Grant. I used to think that made me free. What it actually made me was useful in a different way. Lauren was loved because she made the family look exciting. Mason was loved because he made my father feel powerful. My mother was valued because she kept every surface polished. I was loved when something needed to be corrected without being discussed. At a dealer dinner when I was 29, Grant raised his glass and called me Bennett Coastal's secret weapon. 30 people applauded. I remember smiling so hard my face hurt. For years, I heard weapon. Only later did I hear secret. A secret weapon is taken out when needed, used carefully, cleaned afterward, and returned to the drawer. It is not given a salary that reflects its value. It does not vote. It does not have its name placed on the door. Back in the hospital. I returned to the spreadsheet. I created 2 column headings, what I was told, what the records say. The first line was the $3,750 cruise charge. By the 12th line, the number was much larger. 72 hours after I was admitted, the tests still showed no organ damage. My blood pressure remained unstable, but had not crossed into a range that required immediate delivery. The obstetrician discharged me with a cuff, written instructions, and the kind of warning that sounds simple until you try to live inside it. Check twice a day, call if the numbers rise, return for appointments twice a week, reduce work, avoid stress. I almost laughed at the last instruction. The house was quiet when I returned. One wall of the nursery was painted a soft green. The other still showed strips of blue tape and white primer. Mason had promised to finish it before the conference. But his suitcase was gone and the room looked paused, as if even the paint had decided to wait for him. Mason had left a note on the refrigerator saying he loved us and would call after dinner. Its ordinary handwriting made the lie feel rehearsed, almost more intimate than open cruelty ever could. He was still away. I placed my medication on the kitchen counter, set the blood pressure cuff beside it, and opened Household Actuals. The joint account held 20 months of history. I began with transfers. There were 14, BCM bridge, temporary operating, vendor hold, short-term advance. Different descriptions, same destination, Bennett Coastal Marine Group. The total was $37,400. Mason had moved money from our marriage into my father's company without asking me once. I checked for reimbursements. There were none. Then I returned to the $3,750 cruise charge. The answer was scattered across ordinary records, an automated decline notice in Mason's email, a card alert on our shared tablet, and a message from Grant that had synced before someone deleted it. Use Claire's card for the excursion package. Henderson. Money clears Monday. We'll replace it before she notices. Mason's personal card was near its limit. The company card had been declined. Grant had treated my available credit like a temporary line of financing. But no Henderson payment was scheduled for Monday. There was no incoming wire, no pending deposit, no receivable marked for collection. There was only another promise built to survive until the person hearing it stopped checking. I kept going. A supplier payment had been postponed 3 times. The charter fleet's insurance premium had been paid late. The company's revolving credit line was close to its ceiling. Customer deposits that should have remained attached to future charters were being swept into operating expenses. Bennett Coastal still had polished boats, black SUVs, catered events, and photographs of champagne against sunsets. What it did not have was cash. The company looked wealthy because looking wealthy was one of its largest expenses. That evening, while I was recording my blood pressure, the family tablet lit up on the counter. A message from Lauren appeared. Just keep her calm until after the 15th. Dad promised both of us our share. The screen went blank almost immediately. The message had been deleted. For one ugly second, my mind went where minds go when they have already been betrayed. Mason and Lauren, hotel rooms, private jokes, my sister replacing me not only at the company, but in my marriage. Then I stopped. Suspicion was not evidence. I wrote down the exact time, the sender, and every word I remembered. I did not call Mason. I did not ask Lauren what our share meant. Instead, I called Asha Patel. We had met 3 years earlier at a continuing education seminar on preparer liability. Asha was a tax attorney who spoke in complete sentences and never confused reassurance with honesty. She did not ask whether I wanted revenge. She asked what I knew, when I learned it, which accounts and records I was legally entitled to review, whether I had copied or altered anything, and who still had access to my financial information. I answered slowly. When I finished, she said, "Do not open anything else simply because you can. Access and authorization are not always the same thing." She told me to preserve what had already come to me, create a timeline, and avoid alerting anyone until she understood the boundaries. So I did not call Grant. I did not confront Mason about the $37,400. Confrontation, I was beginning to understand, was another name for telling people what they needed to erase. The next morning, an email arrived from Maggie Cole, my father's longtime bookkeeper. Subject, year-end package for Claire review. Inside the folder were two nearly identical files, charter summary and charter detail, internal. The email from Maggie was ordinary and dangerous. Subject, year-end package for Claire review. The message said the attached files were for preparation of year-end work papers, the same kind of package Bennett Coastal had sent me every January for years. That mattered. I was not breaking into a hidden system or opening a folder marked private. The records had been sent directly to me for work I had been asked to perform. I opened charter summary first. It showed a modest side business, a few corporate outings, several fishing trips, and enough seasonal activity to keep the fleet close to break even. The numbers were familiar because they were the numbers I had been given before. Then I opened charter detail, internal. There were hundreds of transactions, weddings at sunset, fishing weekends, corporate parties, bachelor trips, private anniversary cruises, cash receipts recorded by date, vessel, customer initials, and amount. I compared the internal detail with the summaries I had used to prepare returns over the previous 5 years. Approximately $940,000 in cash receipts had never appeared in the records provided to me. My hands went cold, but I did not keep searching. I closed both files and called Asha. While I waited for her to answer, I reviewed only the documents contained in the same package. The payroll file listed a marketing coordinator earning $85,000 a year. There was no company email address, no timesheet, and no personnel profile. The direct deposit account ended in 4 digits. I recognized because I had helped Lauren open that account after college. Another schedule showed consulting fees that matched my parents' country club charges almost month for month. Fuel invoices had been moved across year-end dates, shifting expenses from one tax period into another. Asha answered on the 3rd ring. I told her exactly what had been sent, what I had opened, and what I had stopped myself from doing. "You signed the returns as a paid preparer," she said. "That creates exposure, but it does not automatically make you part of the fraud. If you prepared the filings from falsified records and did not know, that distinction matters." Then her voice sharpened. "But now you do know, from this point forward, your actions matter as much as the documents." She explained that I could not simply amend the corporation's returns myself. I was not an officer authorized to sign for the company. What I could do was withdraw from the engagement, document when I learned the truth, protect my professional position, and report through the proper channels. "Silence does not stay neutral forever," she said. "The longer it lasts after knowledge, the worse it looks." Asha had me begin a timeline of knowledge. The date I saw the news report. The date. I found the cruise charge. The date. I discovered the transfers from our joint account. The date. Maggie sent the year-end package. The names of the files. Who sent them? What I opened. what I did next. She wanted no dramatic language, no conclusions, and no speculation. Only facts that could survive someone else reading them without hearing my voice. After we ended the call, I phoned Maggie. She answered quietly. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. "Did you send me the wrong file?" I asked. The silence on her end stretched long enough to become an answer. "No," she said. "I sent it to the correct review folder. I sent it to the correct person." She did not call herself a whistleblower. She did not ask me to protect her or praise her. "I have entered those numbers for too long," she said. "I cannot keep pretending the person typing them cannot also read." Then she told me what fear had purchased from her: health insurance. A pension she was earning. The belief that no one would hire a 58-year-old bookkeeper who had spent 2 decades with one company. Grant had also paid part of her son's college tuition after her husband died. Gratitude had become debt, and debt had become silence. I did not forgive her in that moment, but I understood something I had not understood before. A corrupt system is not built only by cruel people. It is also held upright by frightened people who are terrified of losing the piece of safety the system allows them to keep. I called Asha back. "This is no longer a marriage problem," she said. At that moment, a message from Mason appeared on my phone. "After the 15th, I'll have big news for us." Mason came home on June 18th with a tan no conference room could explain and a paper bag from a cruise terminal gift shop. He kissed my forehead, set a box of coconut candy on the kitchen counter, and began telling me about Tampa. The Henderson account had been difficult. Grant had worked late. The meetings had run long. Everyone was exhausted. "The Hendersons still haven't signed," he said. I knew they had been on the ship. I had seen their names in the internal charter notes and their faces behind my father during the news segment. I waited until Mason had changed clothes and sat across from me at the kitchen table. "Which presentation did Henderson like best?" I asked. The pause was almost invisible. Then the story assembled itself. Henderson had attended only the first day. His assistant stayed for the remaining sessions. Grant had worked the room until midnight. The hotel food had been terrible. The whole trip had been pressure from beginning to end. Mason did not lie like a frightened man. He lied like a man completing an assignment. Every detail arrived polished, balanced, and ready for approval. As though he had rehearsed the lie beside the ocean itself. I let the story settle between us before I placed my phone on the table. "There is a charge on my card," I said. $3,750. His face moved through 3 familiar stages. First came denial. "That has to be fraud. Call the bank." When I did not answer, denial became minimization. It was only the excursion package. The company card was temporarily blocked, and mine was near the limit. Then came justification. "Grant said the Henderson payment would cover it. I'm part of your family now. The money comes back around." "Back to whom?" I asked. He looked toward the unfinished nursery instead of answering. Mason reminded me that I had made him an authorized user. "Yes," I said. "I gave you permission to use the card. I did not give you permission to decide what my trust was worth." The sentence changed his expression. Not guilt, calculation. I asked about Lauren's message. Keep her calm until after the 15th. Dad promised both of us our share. For the first time, Mason looked truly startled. He asked where I had seen it. He said I was misunderstanding. He accused the shared tablet of taking messages out of context, as though technology had developed motives. I waited. Eventually, he told me. Grant was preparing a restructuring. Mason would become Chief Operating Officer. Lauren would receive additional equity tied to marketing, I would become chief financial officer. The 15th had been the bank's deadline for renewing Bennett Coastal's credit line. Grant needed a financial package carrying my professional approval. There had been no affair between Mason and Lauren. The truth was less ordinary and more intimate. They were partners in keeping me useful. Mason knew the new position would place me in front of the company's financial records. He knew Grant needed my name. He also knew that if I became alarmed too early, the credit line, his promotion, and his promised ownership might disappear. So my husband had managed me the way he managed a difficult client. He reached across the table and closed both hands around mine. "I did all of this for our future," he said. I looked at him and understood that his version of "our" included Grant, Bennett Coastal, the COO title, and whatever percentage had been promised to him. I was the signature at the bottom of their future. My phone rang before I answered. Grant did not apologize. He said I was misreading a temporary cash flow problem. Outsiders did not understand family companies. Banks wanted clean packages, not complicated explanations. He could make this right. Chief Financial Officer, 20% equity, a salary large enough to make every unpaid January look like an investment. "We can put everything back where it belongs," he said. "We can go back to normal." I did not refuse. I asked him to send the complete offer in writing. His voice softened with relief. He thought the number had finally reached me. The email arrived within an hour. I forwarded it to Asha. She called after reading it. "He is not offering you a chair," she said. "He is measuring the person he plans to seat in front of the fire." Asha called the next morning and told me I needed 2 lawyers, not 1. She would handle the tax side, my exposure as a paid preparer, the timeline of what I had learned, protection of my CPA license, withdrawal from future work for Bennett Coastal, and the whistleblower package. For everything involving the marriage, she introduced me to Elena Ruiz, a family law attorney in Miami who specialized in divorces tied to closely held businesses. Elena's questions were different. What money had left the joint account? Which assets were titled in both names? Had Mason moved anything after learning I was concerned? Did I feel safe at home? What temporary orders might be needed before the baby arrived? She told me not to empty the accounts, confront Mason alone, or move documents outside counsel's preservation process. A temporary order, she explained, was not punishment. It was a fence placed around marital property before frightened people decided that disappearing money was easier than explaining it. For the first time, caution felt like action. Asha was protecting my name. Elena was protecting the life attached to it. My next call was to Atlantic Gate Logistics. I told my supervisor that my name appeared on tax filings for my family's company and that I had discovered evidence suggesting the records provided to me were false. By the end of the day, I was placed on paid administrative leave. My approval authority was suspended while outside counsel reviewed my disclosure. My supervisor looked genuinely sorry. "I believe you," he said, "but my belief cannot replace procedure." Until then, I had imagined that doing the right thing would separate me cleanly from the people doing wrong. Instead, I might lose the promotion I had been working toward, the reputation I had spent years building, future income, and the quiet certainty that I was always the most reliable person in the room. Then my family began its counterattack. My access to Bennett Coastal disappeared. Shared folders went dark. Payroll vanished. The company's attorney sent a letter demanding the return of confidential materials and threatening to report me to the State Accountancy Board for unauthorized access. Lauren called 3 cousins and an aunt before breakfast. According to her version, pregnancy had made me unstable. I had misunderstood ordinary accounting entries, become obsessed with the company, and decided I deserved ownership. For 2 days, their version of me seemed stronger than my evidence. I worried Maggie would deny everything. I worried the files would be rejected. I worried Grant would convince everyone I was confused and vindictive. I worried Atlantic Gate would decide I was too dangerous to keep. Asha did not offer comfort. She offered structure. The files had been emailed directly to me. The subject line said they were for review. I had not bypassed a password or entered a restricted folder. The metadata remained intact. 15 years of work papers showed that Bennett Coastal had consistently given me filtered summaries rather than source-level records. Most important, I had stopped reviewing the moment I recognized the irregularities and called counsel. They revoked access too late, Asha said. They can close the door now. They cannot prove you climbed through a window that was never there. Elaine arrived that afternoon carrying chicken soup and a loaf of bread. She began with Tampa. The hotel had been noisy. The meetings had run long. Your father barely slept. Then she saw the blood pressure cuff beside my chair and lost the sentence she was trying to finish. She sat across from me and told me about Grant at 12 years old. His father's work truck had been repossessed at the school bus stop. 2 men hooked chains beneath it while other children watched. Grant stood there holding his lunchbox and listened as the truck was dragged away. He had promised himself he would never look poor again. For a moment, I could see the frightened boy beneath the polished boats, the parties, and the lies. I understand why Dad is afraid, I said. I do not understand why you always make someone else pay for that fear. Elaine looked toward the unfinished nursery. She did not defend him. She did not apologize either. After she left, Elena called. She had reviewed the preliminary board consent attached to Grant's CFO offer. Elaine's signature was already on it. My mother had not merely known about the plan, she had approved it. That night, my blood pressure climbed into the severe range. At 35 weeks and 6 days, I was taken back to the hospital. The second admission felt different from the first. My blood pressure had crossed into the severe range, and the obstetrician no longer spoke in possibilities. They stabilized me with medication, monitored Willa's heart rate, and explained that if my numbers held, they would induce labor at 36 weeks and 1 day. Mason arrived before sunrise carrying coffee for the nurses. Hun updated the family group chat, asked questions during rounds, and stood beside my bed with the solemn posture of a husband determined to be useful. He was not entirely performing. I saw real fear in his face whenever the monitor changed rhythm. He rubbed my shoulder through contractions and asked whether I needed ice, another pillow, or silence. That was what made everything harder. Mason loved me. He also loved the future Grant had promised him. He depended on my father's approval, salary, and vision of success. And somewhere along the way, he had begun to believe that my job was to repair whatever damage their ambition caused. His affection was real. It was simply weaker than his ambition. The induction lasted through 1 night and most of the next day. Between contractions, he timed each rise and fall on his phone, then turned the screen away whenever a message from Grant appeared. I noticed, but I had no strength left for another investigation. My body had reduced the world to breathing, pressure, and the small heartbeat moving steadily beside mine that night. At 4:18 in the morning, Willa Reed entered the world small, furious, and breathing on her own. She was stable, but because she had arrived early, the nurses checked her temperature and blood sugar regularly. She spent brief periods under a warmer, but did not need a long stay in the neonatal intensive care unit. When they placed her against my chest, the room narrowed to the weight of her body and the quick movement of her breath. I thought about the lesson my family had prepared for her before she had even opened her eyes. Be useful if you want to be loved. Balance the books, keep everyone calm, fix the problem before anyone has to admit they caused it. I touched one finger to her cheek. Not you, I whispered. You do not have to earn the right to belong. Mason stood beside the bed and cried, later, when the room was quiet and Willa slept in the bassinet. He sat with his elbows on his knees and apologized. He said Grant had pulled him into a world he did not understand until he was already living inside it. He said he had never thought of the cruise charge as stealing. He believed the company would repay it. He believed I would finally receive the CFO position I had deserved for years. He said he had wanted all of us to be safe, for several minutes. I almost believed we could separate Mason from my father's influence and find whatever remained of our marriage underneath. Then my phone vibrated. The message was from Elena. During the hours I had been in labor, Mason had transferred $9,000 from our joint account. Memo, legal retainer. His attorney had been paid before he sat beside my hospital bed and cried. I looked at Mason across the room. The tears had been real. The transfer was real too. That was the final cruelty of loving someone who had learned to keep two versions of every truth. He did not have to fake tenderness in order to betray me. He could feel remorse and still protect himself with money that belonged to both of us. I stopped asking whether Mason loved me. That was no longer the useful question. The question was whether his love had ever been strong enough to make him stop using me. The answer was not in his tears. It was in the bank statement. Marisol visited later that afternoon. She had worked downstairs during my first admission and came up during her break to see Willa. She looked at the baby, then at the leather folder Grant had sent to the hospital earlier that morning. Babies don't change people, she said. They reveal them. She moved the folder away from the bassinet and placed my water pitcher where it had been. Then she left without another word. That evening, Grant sent me a message. Tomorrow I'll bring the final version. Once you sign, everything will be protected. I read it twice. Then looked at Willa sleeping beside me. 4 o'clock, I replied. Only you. By 4 o'clock. The room had been reduced to what mattered. Asha and Elena knew Grant was coming. The charge nurse had instructions that only my father could enter. Mason had been removed from the list of people allowed to receive medical information. A hospital security officer stood near the elevators, close enough to respond without turning the meeting into a spectacle. My laptop contained no evidence files. It showed only Asha's secure portal and a confirmation page. Grant arrived exactly on time. I went first to Willa's bassinet. For one moment, his face softened without calculation. Then he placed a leather folder on the rolling table and became the man who had sold boats for 40 years. Inside were an employment agreement, a restricted stock grant, a signed board consent, and an offer of 20% equity. The salary was larger than anything attached to my name before. The health plan covered Willa and me. There was a college fund, the right to live in a mortgage-free company house, and a written promise that Mason would be terminated if I demanded it. It was not a weak bribe. It was the life of least resistance, printed on expensive paper. Then I reached the section Asha had marked. As Chief Financial Officer, I would ratify, adopt, and standardize prior financial records. The indemnification agreement protected me for future decisions, but not for earlier records I later approved or standardized. Grant did not want me merely to clean the past. He wanted my new signature to turn the past into my decision. For several seconds, I allowed myself to imagine signing. I would keep my parents. Willa would have grandparents, a home, medical coverage, and money for college. I would avoid courtrooms, professional investigations, relocation fights, and the terror of beginning again with a newborn. If I refused, I could lose my family, my marriage, my reputation, and the career I had spent years building. I might raise Willa alone while lawyers argued about money I no longer trusted. The offer looked like safety until I understood that every benefit remained inside Grant's control. The house, the salary, the insurance. And Willa's college account were not gifts. They were new lines of credit secured by our obedience. Grant sat beside the bassinet and began the speech I had heard in pieces all my life. "A family is a boat," he said. "Outside are banks, government, strangers, and weather. They all want something from the hull. Inside, we keep each other dry. When water comes in, family does not jump overboard." He told me again about his father's truck being taken at the school bus stop, the chains, the watching children, and the promise he had made never to look poor again. I did not deny his pain. I simply stopped allowing it to become my debt. "Did this chair exist when I was 19?" I asked. "Or did it begin existing when you learned I had read the file?" Grant spread his hands. "It exists now. That is what matters. If I am protected, why does the first exclusion cover the exact work you want me to do?" His eyes moved toward the contract. "Lawyers write defensively. When the records are questioned, who opens the door? You, Mason, Lauren, or the new CFO?" He did not answer directly. "Instead," he said, "your signature is already on 5 years of filings. We sail together or we sink together." I looked at the folder, then at Willa. "The chair was never empty," I said. "It was being saved for the person whose name would be on the door when everything caught fire." I turned the laptop toward him. The screen displayed Asha's secure portal. Authorize counsel to submit. Behind that button were my timeline of knowledge, my withdrawal from future preparation work, the supporting documents, the whistleblower submission, and the notices meant to protect my professional standing. Grant's face changed when he understood that the records were no longer in the room. I clicked. A confirmation number appeared. There was no alarm, no raised voice, no dramatic sound beyond Willa breathing in her bassinet. The truth had simply left the family. Grant closed the leather folder slowly. "You have made yourself an orphan," he said. "No," I answered. "I only stopped paying for the privilege of being your daughter." He looked at Willa once, then walked out. After the door closed, I opened the documents Elena had prepared and signed the divorce petition. 2 decisions in one afternoon. One protected my professional name. The other protected the life attached to it. I did not feel victorious. I felt, for the first time, that my name could no longer be used while I remained silent. Justice did not arrive like a siren. It moved through 16 months of record requests, interviews, bank reviews, charter deposit reconciliations, disallowed personal expenses, and payroll verification. The $940,000 I had first seen was only the visible edge. Investigators eventually identified more than $2 million in unreported revenue, irregular payroll payments, personal costs buried inside business accounts, unpaid sales taxes, and other liabilities that had accumulated while everyone admired the boats. For most of that year, justice looked administrative. It arrived in certified envelopes, calls, requests for records I had explained, and long stretches when nobody told me whether anything was happening. Asha warned me that processes were not designed to provide closure. They were designed to establish facts. I learned to stop treating every quiet week as proof that Grant had escaped. The machinery was slow because it had to distinguish suspicion from evidence, error from intent, and family grievance from financial misconduct. Slow did not mean inactive. It meant the outcome would belong to the record, not to me. Bennett Coastal did not collapse the week I authorized the submission. First, the bank refused to renew the credit line. Then suppliers demanded payment in advance. Customers began asking for their deposits back. A federal tax lien appeared. One creditor petitioned for a receiver. The fleet was sold vessel by vessel, and the company was finally dissolved after there was no operating business left to preserve. The tax returns themselves did not become public. What people saw were the consequences: liens, court filings, auction notices, and receivership records. Grant could still tell people that his daughter had destroyed the family, but the story carried less weight each time another public document appeared. He never gave me a complete confession. I did not need one. I was not happy when the company disappeared. Bennett Coastal had been part of my childhood, and grief does not become celebration simply because the loss was deserved. I did not destroy my father's business. I stopped rescuing it from the cost of his decisions. Grant and Elaine moved into a smaller apartment near the water. Months later, my mother sent me a letter. I thought silence was how I kept this family intact. She wrote, "Now I understand that silence only kept the most powerful person unchanged." She did not ask me to forgive her. Perhaps she understood that asking would have been another demand. I left the letter unanswered for months. Lauren found a marketing job at a regional appliance company. She had scheduled hours, a supervisor, measurable targets, and a payroll system that did not hide her under another employee's name. I heard through a cousin that she was doing well. I was not ready to speak to her. I was also no longer interested in needing her to fail. The divorce produced no cinematic punishment. It produced arithmetic. Mason was assigned responsibility for the $3,750 cruise charge. I received an equalization credit of $18,700, representing half of the $37,400 he had moved from our joint funds. The $9,000 legal retainer he transferred while I was in labor was also considered when the remaining assets were divided. The ledger finally ran in both directions. During that process, a forensic accounting firm in Seattle offered me a position. Elena filed a petition to relocate with Willa. Mason objected. He told the court he did not want his daughter taken away from him. Elena did not argue that he was dangerous or that he should lose his rights. She presented the record of what he had actually done: missed prenatal appointments, the cruise while I was hospitalized, the transfer during labor, and his incomplete use of the temporary parenting schedule. The court approved the relocation with a long-distance parenting plan. Mason received weekly video calls, 4 extended visits each year, shared travel costs, and 2 summer weeks once Willa was old enough. I moved to Seattle because the court allowed it, not because I disappeared with his child. In the first 2 years, Mason completed only 2 visits. He arrived with large gifts and easy warmth. He could make Willa laugh within minutes. For a short afternoon, he became the father he believed himself to be. Then weeks passed without a call. He remained charming in brief appearances and unreliable in ordinary time. I stopped covering for him, but I never taught Willa to hate him. Someday, She would be old enough to compare promises with presents for herself. Some men, I learned, are made for excursions, not voyages. 2 years after I left Florida, Willa and I lived in Seattle, where rain softened the edges of the city, and nobody knew the version of me my family had sold. I spent my first year working for a forensic accounting firm. Then I opened a small office of my own. The gold lettering on the glass read, Claire Bennett. Forensic accounting. I kept Bennett, not for Grant, because it was also mine. I refused to let my father decide what my name meant, simply because he had used it first. The business was not an empire. There were no profiles, no fortune, and no perfect ending waiting behind the office door. There was only work I chose, bills I understood, and a life that belonged to me. I had 3 employees, a narrow conference room, and months when cash flow made sleep difficult. Once, I lost a major client because I would not soften a finding their board wanted described as an administrative inconsistency. Some mornings, I still checked bank alerts before getting out of bed. I never added anyone as an authorized user. The word pending could tighten my chest before I had even opened the transaction. Asking for help remained difficult because part of me still believed every favor arrived with an invoice hidden behind it. But healing appeared in ordinary choices. I hired a sitter when I needed one. I let another accountant review my work without treating oversight as distrust. I accepted meals from neighbors without immediately planning how to repay them. Most importantly, I stopped giving away professional labor to earn affection. Elaine sent Willa birthday cards through a post office box. I allowed letters and small gifts. She could not send messages through Mason, arrive without permission, or use Willa to pressure me into reconciliation. She followed the rules. That was not forgiveness. It was a small door with a lock, and I held the key. Maggie eventually took a bookkeeping job at a nonprofit. One winter, a card arrived at my office without a return address. Thank you for doing what I should have done sooner. I did not make Maggie a hero. She had remained silent for years while other people carried the risk. Still, I kept the card. Sometimes people do the right thing too late. Late is not the same as never. On Saturdays, Willa and I walked around Green Lake. One afternoon, she pointed toward the water and counted the ducks. 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. I knew she was wrong. I did not correct her. I had spent most of my life fixing numbers, so other people would not have to face what they had done. With Willa, I learned that not every error needed to become a test. A child could count badly, laugh loudly, ask for help, and still be loved without improving first. That was the home I wanted to build. I once believed love was an account that had to be constantly funded. Later, I understood that any place requiring payment for belonging had never been home. From the sidewalk outside my office, I could see my name reflected in the glass. For the first time, my numbers, my work, and my name stood on the same side of the door. If you have ever been the person who kept your family running but had no seat when decisions were made, tell me when you realized you needed a boundary. Would you have signed Grant's folder or pressed the button on Claire's laptop? Share this story with the person whose quiet work is always noticed only when it stops. And subscribe for more stories about people who finally stopped paying to be loved.